Okay, hello everyone and welcome to the UCCS Undergraduate Policy Research Showcase. I'm Richard Kravitz, Director at UCCS, and it's a pleasure to welcome both our students and our guests. This is the third and final segment of the showcase. We've had a great program so far, and every expectation that that'll continue. This is partly a celebration of all your achievements and accomplishments. We know it hasn't been easy, especially with the COVID transitions going on and the telecommuting that we're all doing. But you've accomplished a lot, and we're very proud of you. We're also really grateful to our internship hosts who have made experiential learning opportunities available to our students, because that's really the core of their education here at UCCS. So thanks to all, and let's get started.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Kravitz. And so the format today will be that each student will present. After the student presents, we will take one question from the internship host site. If there isn't a question from the internship host site, then we will turn the question over to our academic team. We will have an open Q&A at the end of the session as time permits. And with that, our first student is Emma Bruce, who interned with the Office of California State Senator Scott Wiener's office.
Hi, can you guys all hear me all right?
Yep, we can hear you just fine.
Perfect. All right, and then can you see my screen?
Not yet, but I bet, oh, there we go. Actually, it's still missing, it's this one that's missing the bottom.
Okay, let me fix that then very quickly. I apologize
No
for
problem.
the delay. Did that do anything?
All right, hold on.
Nope, that was worse.
Yeah.
All right, third time's the charm. Did that do it in a second?
Hold on just a second. I mean, it's showing right now. It's just that it shows up. Oh, there we go. That's perfect. Third time's the charm, Emma.
Perfect. Okay. Hi, my name is Emma Bruce, and my project is on the use of substandard teaching credentials. Across the state, school districts have increasingly relied on substandard credentials to staff classrooms when fully credentialed teachers cannot be found. Before I get into the specifics of my research question, it's important to discuss why the use of these credentials has grown so pervasive. Following the Great Recession, California schools lost billions in funding, and the total teacher workforce shrank by more than a third. Since then, fewer students have enrolled in teacher credentialing programs. Together, these factors have fueled a teacher shortage, and this shortage has in turn made many districts dependent on substandard credentials, all of which has led to my research question: what impact do substandard teaching credentials have on student outcomes? I hypothesize that districts with a higher number of substandard credentials issued experience worse student outcomes. For my research, I conducted a small-n comparative study of West Contra Costa and Riverside Unified School District. If you look at my poster, you can see that the two share similar demographics. To measure student outcome, I examined ELA and mathematics testing data, as well as graduation rates. If you look at the stacked bar chart on my poster, you can see that of the two districts, WCCUSD used substantially more substandard credentials. After comparing the data, it's clear that students in RUSD outperformed their counterparts in WCCUSD in both ELA and mathematics testing, typically with over 10% more students meeting or exceeding state standards. Graduation rates in RUSD also ranged from 5 to 15 percentage points higher than those in WCCUSD over the 5-year period that I examined. Together, this data confirms my initial hypothesis. Moving forward, California should invest early and often in teacher recruitment programs to prevent future staffing shortages. And in the meantime, districts should implement mentoring and training programs to support teachers already hired on substandard credentials so that they can be more effective in the classroom. Thank you. That's all I have.
Great. Thank you so much, Emma. And so if there is a question for Emma from California State Senator Scott Wiener's office, you can go ahead and raise your hand. I can go ahead and unmute you on my end. All right, and then if, oh, there we go. Krista Pfefferkorn.
Oh, I muted. Okay. Hi, Emma. What about those teachers that are already teaching who do have the substandard credentials? You said more mentoring, but is there a continuing education you think that they should do, or anything to bring them up to standards?
You know, if possible, mentoring and continued training would be most beneficial, but research shows that what's most beneficial is a mentoring program within the school that the substandard teacher is working at. California has really high turnover of all teachers. It's above the national average, but it's even higher among those with substandard credentials. And the #1 way to prevent turnover among all teachers, especially those with substandard credentials, is to provide mentoring and training programs, but especially those mentoring programs, so that they can grow within their own schools and just become more effective in the classroom and work on the skills that they didn't fully gain because they don't have a full credential yet.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Krista, for that question. Thank you so much, Emma, for your great presentation today. And so our next student that will be presenting is Christopher Lee, who interned with the Office of California State Governor Gavin Newsom's office.
Yes, hi. I'm going to share my screen now. Second. All right, hi everyone, my name is Chris. I did my topic on school choice. I chose this topic because California has somewhat of a dysfunctional K-12 public school system. There's a lot of discrepancy between economics and race, and I wanted to see if implementing a school choice program would help students achieve a better education. For those of you who don't know, the school choice that I'm looking at is essentially a child's ability to use their state allotted funds to attend private school. So my hypothesis was that school choice students would have marginally higher student scores, that choice schools would be more diverse, and that the program would have no impact on local property taxes. To see how this program would look in California, I looked at the Milwaukee Choice Program because it's the longest running in the nation and has a very diverse population. I looked at 2 inner city districts and compared the scores of their choice schools versus their public schools. And then I also compared those schools with outer districts with high socioeconomic status to see how much income affected a child's ability to achieve a good education. I found that choice students actually performed the same, and in some cases even worse than public schools in those 2 inner city districts I looked at, and that across the state, scores and diversity of student populations only increased when economic disadvantage decreased. So there was a direct correlation there. There was also no correlation between expansion of choice program and property taxes rising. So therefore, if California were to implement a choice program, my policy suggestion would be to have an economic affirmative action element, since income tends to be the leading factor here of student achievement. Also to incentivize better private schools to participate in the program, and also implement initiatives that promote the importance of education in disadvantaged communities.
Great, thank you so much, Chris. And so if there is a question from the Office of California State Governor Gavin Newsom's office, you can just go ahead and raise your hand and I can unmute you on our end. All right, and if not, a question from our academic team, if you can go ahead and raise your hand, I can go ahead and call on you. All right, Professor Kayla.
Hi, Chris. Since you looked at Milwaukee, I was just wondering if you thought there could possibly be any differences in terms of taking these findings and applying them to California, then if you thought there might be some reason that they could be different for California.
Definitely. I think, well, also Milwaukee is a city, so I looked at a really small area versus the entire state, although I did do one comparative of public and choice school performance across Wisconsin. But basically, I think the biggest difference is probably population size, and I think the racial makeup might be a little bit different as well. There might be a higher white population in Milwaukee. So there are some discrepancies for sure.
Great, thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Professor Quila, for that question. And thank you so much, Chris, for a great presentation today. And so our next student presenter is Fiona Lee, and she interned this term at the API Legislative Caucus.
Does that look okay?
Yeah, it looks great. Thank you, Fiona.
Hi, my name is Fiona Lee, and I will be presenting my research on California's response to the opioid epidemic. In 2011, the CDC declared prescription drug abuse as a national epidemic, with overdose deaths overpassing the number of deaths in the nation by motor vehicles and firearms. 70% of those deaths are attributed to opioids, which is rooted in the pharmaceutical industry's push to market opioids from the 1990s. California's response to this opioid epidemic included the 2014 guidelines for prescribing controlled substances for pain that were released by the Medical Board of California in an effort to restrict opioid prescribing practices. And AB 1535, which was passed the following year in 2015, that allowed California pharmacists to give naloxone, an opioid overdose reversing drug, over the counter without a prescription. Despite these two changes, California's opioid overdose death rate today is still 3 times what it was in 2010. My research question was whether or not the 2014 and 2015 legislation have really addressed the opioid epidemic. I hypothesized that they have been ineffective and have pushed individuals who have previously relied on prescription opioids to turn to illicit drugs, which have a far higher risk of overdose due to the unknown substances and dosages. Using data from California's Department of Public Health and CDC, I compared the rates of opioid prescriptions to the opioid overdose death rates from 2010 to 2019 for 4 counties of California. My findings showed my hypothesis was correct, as statewide prescription rates uniformly decreased, but death rates continued to fluctuate and even increased to the highest it's been in the past decade. The data also showed a decrease in overdose deaths after AB 1535 was passed in 2015, but the effect was reversed within 2 years. Therefore, my policy recommendation is that legislation targeting only the prescribing practices and naloxone access are insufficient to reduce the overdose death rate, and longer-term solutions such as increasing accessibility to addiction recovery treatment should instead be pursued. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Fiona. And so if there's a question from the API Legislative Caucus, if you can go ahead and raise your hand, I can go ahead and unmute you on our end. All right, and then if not, a question from our academic team. All right, Professor Kayla.
Hi, Fiona. I was just wondering, you mentioned that other long-term solutions should be explored on your poster. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts as to what that might entail or what could be a good way to help kind of alleviate this issue.
Right, so currently there is a drug in development called Suboxone. It is a drug used in medical assisted therapy for recovery of addictions. And it's not available except for emergency rooms and from your primary care physician. And you need separate licensing and training in order to be able to prescribe it. And so there are actually individuals who are addicted to opioids that are buying this illicitly on the street because they don't have access to it legally. And so I believe that increasing access to that drug specifically would improve the situation in terms of helping for recovery for long-term addiction.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Professor Kayla, for the question, and thank you, Fiona, for that great presentation today. And so our next student that will be presenting is Kayla Midkip, and she interned this term with the Office of Assemblymember Kevin Kiley's office.
Hi, can you guys see my slide all right?
Yeah, looks great, Kayla, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So good afternoon. My name is Kayla, and I looked at the effect of election types on the partisan strength of elected candidates. So polarization has been growing steadily since the 90s, leading to legislative gridlock, which has been an issue here in California. The top 2 open primary was implemented as a ballot proposition, Prop 14 in 2010, to increase representation and reduce partisanship. My focus is, after 1 decade, how did the top 2 primary achieve its goal of attracting more moderate candidates for elections for state representatives? I hypothesize that candidates will become more focused on nonpartisan issues under the top 2 election system because they will worry that their party might not make it onto the ballot. I analyzed years before and after the implementation of Prop 14 using a large N study, and I used around 990 observations of ideology variables for state and legislative candidates between 2010 and 18. I observed moderation as a measure of change in average campaign finance scores for candidates using Adam Bonica's database on ideology, money in politics, and elections. I found a significant difference only for Republican candidates. Their scores continue to fall closer to 0 in the time since 2010, while those of Democratic candidates saw no change. In a t-test comparing incumbents who ran in 2010 and after, I found a significant increase in partisanship strength for Democratic candidates only. In a predominantly Democratic state, Republican candidates may need to support nonpartisan causes with more intensity than Democrats in order to stay on the ballot. In regard to policy implications, I suggest conducting a cost-benefit analysis of the increase in independent voter participation compared to unequal moderation of partisan candidates. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Kayla. And so if there was a question from Assemblymember Kevin Kiley's office. Karita Moats, there we go. I just unmuted you on our end.
Perfect. Yes, this is Karita from Assemblyman Kiley's office, and great job, Kayla. I'm just so impressed because I know you've been working really hard. I just want to quickly ask, so you saw the biggest difference in Republican candidates over the last decade. Can you sort of hypothesize, or how do you rectify that with the huge decrease, not huge, but the decrease that we've seen in Republican voter registration over the last decade as well, and the increase in nonpartisan NPP voter registrations?
Thank you. That's a great question. So certainly I would attribute the two-party primary to an increase in no party preference registration. And I do hypothesize that could be because of Republican voters that are they feel less that they identify with Republican candidates, or they feel as if they vote as a Republican candidate in a Democratic district that they will not have as much impact with their vote. But I definitely would suggest that we implement further studies to kind of look into how this actually plays out once the elected candidates are in office. I hope that answers the question.
It does. Great job.
Great. Thank you so much, Karita, for that question. And thank you, Kayla, for a great presentation today. And so our next student that will be presenting is Bryce Park, who interned with the Office of Sacramento City Council member Rick Jennings' office.
All right. Hello, my name is Bryce Park. My research project is residential zoning, or less mean more. And my research question is to determine what extent does upzoning, which means allowing denser development within specific areas, increase the rate of construction of housing in California. Over the past few decades, California has been undergoing a severe housing crisis, which has been deeply impacting the low and middle class residents of California. In addition, urban sprawl has remained dominant in development Californian cities, increasing their geographical footprint and environmental footprint. In order to combat these trends, the process of upzoning is an attractive option, as it offers cheaper housing for residents and more denser housing. My hypothesis is, as you increase the extent of upzoning, such as the proportion of the city upzoned, the extent that limitations are decreased, the higher the housing construction rate will increase. The methodology is a year-by-year change in the rate of housing construction, observing 5 different cities of varying population sizes, predominantly along the coast, with the exception of Bakersfield. As you can see in the graph, there is no clear outstanding city other than San Francisco in the initial 2013 observation. And this shows that there is no clear conclusive evidence that upzoning does have an impact on the rate of housing construction, but rather other confounding variables such as the current economy, availability of space, and development may play a larger role. And I think it is important that further research should be done in the larger metropolitan area, comparing nearby cities, and the impacts on urban sprawl and upzoning. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bryce. And then there is a question from City Council member Rick Jennings' office. If you can go ahead and raise your hand, I can go ahead and unmute you on our end. All right, and then if not, a question from our academic team. Professor Pantoja.
Hi, Bryce. Good job on the presentation. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more onto what you found about San Francisco.
So regarding my observations in San Francisco, San Francisco has shown higher degrees of positive increase in their housing construction, but it's also possible that due to the low number of houses constructed in the 2013 sample, that a relatively small quantitative increase may lead to a larger percentage increase. So at the moment, I don't think any conclusive conclusions can be drawn from it.
I see. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Professor Panto, for that question, and thank you, Bryce, for a great presentation today. And so our next student is Paloma Ramos, and she interned with the Mexican consulate.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paloma Ramos, and I focused my research on the farm worker wages in California. Some basic background on this is the reason why I started researching this topic is because in June, the Supreme Court ruled the Agricultural Relations Act as unconstitutional. And so my research question related to how much does legislation impact wages for farm workers in California? My basic hypothesis was that if the state has a more robust set of legislation for farm workers, then annual wages will increase over time, and additionally, the gap between median income will decrease as well. In order to gain a further inference on a causal relationship, I looked at states like New York and additionally Texas and Florida because they are right to work states, and they both have a very robust set, and they are both very large economies. And my methodology was I utilized a policy analysis, again, with, as previously stated, with California, New York, and Florida, and Texas. And my results were that I took 3 wages from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and compared them to the median income each year. So as you can see, the results disproved my hypothesis. Even though California has very precise legislation regarding farm workers, the wages remain very stagnant throughout the years. And even when adjusted for inflation, it remains highly stagnant. Some confounding variables for this research is one's immigration status, as one's immigration status can severely limit their access or knowledge of these rights. And it is important to ensure proper implementation of this legislation as because of climate change and the recent droughts that are looming over the state. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Paloma. And so if there's a question from the Mexican consulate, if you can just go ahead and raise your hand, I can go ahead and unmute you on our end. All right, and then if not, a question from our academic team.
Oh, I realized I stopped sharing my screen. Let's see. Sorry about that.
All right, Professor Pantoja.
Hi, Paloma. Yeah, great job here again. So you mentioned implementation issues. Do you think that like if there are any implementation issues in California that you think could explain the fact that wages have remained stagnant, like based on any research that you found?
Yeah, actually in this, with the recent pandemic, a research done by the COVID-19 Farm Workers Project, they collaborated with Cal OSHA, and they stated that their work sites did not provide enough information or sanitation for COVID-19 protections. So a lot of the problems just lie within the growers not providing enough information for farm workers. And additionally, because in a National Agricultural Workers Survey, over 56% of farm workers in California alone are undocumented, and many fear that if they raise any sort of concerns regarding their labor rights, they might fear deportation. So, and primarily has to do with like the streamline between legislation and farm worker and the growers on making sure they have, and additionally that many of them fear raising any concerns, and the lack of data available additionally can impact the implementation of policy.
Right, thank you.
Great, thank you, Professor Pantoja, for that question. And thank you so much, Paloma, for a great presentation today.
Thank you.
So our next student that will be presenting is Chloe Rosenstock. and she interned with the Office of California State Governor Gavin Newsom.
Is this all right? Can you see my screen?
Yep, looks great, Chloe. Thank you.
Great. Okay, sounds good. Hello, everybody. My name is Chloe Rosenstock, and today I will be talking about my project, Let's Talk About Sexual Health, the Effects of Healthcare Accessibility on STI Rates in Low-Income Counties. So in 2019, California had a higher total number of STIs than any other state in the US. This information impacts all of Californians, of course, but most especially low-income folks who tend to have disparate health outcomes, as is found in the Social Science Journal. Because of this, I decided to focus on low-income counties specifically to evaluate which factors could impact rates of STIs and help to create a healthier future for these Californians. Although there are multiple variables that could be studied, I conducted a study of 24 low-income counties in California to see if healthcare accessibility specifically made a difference in STI transmission rates. I hypothesized that the more accessible the healthcare was in the county, the lower rates of STIs that one would see. I measured accessibility of healthcare through 3 separate dimensions: number of doctors per county, number of healthcare facilities per county, and percent of the county that was insured. I standardized for population differences and gave each county a score from 0 to 10, 0 being the least accessible healthcare and 10 being the most. I found that counties with higher healthcare accessibility scores actually did not necessarily see a lower rate of STIs, as you can see on Figure 1. Here, we see a sample of 8 counties in ascending order from worst healthcare accessibility to best. If healthcare accessibility had been correlated with STI rates, we would have seen the STI rates beside actually descending, but that's not what we see on the graph. However, my initial thoughts about healthcare generally correlating with lower STI rates was not entirely wrong. I found that 2 of my dimensions of healthcare accessibility actually did correlate with lower STI rates. The more healthcare facilities that are present in the county, the fewer STIs, and the same goes for a higher percent of the population insured. These relationships are visualized in Figures 3 and 4 respectively, and both of these correlations are actually statistically significant, but they're not strong correlations. This means that there is more research to be done and other variables to consider. But with this preliminary information, new policy initiatives could include investment in more community clinics, hospitals, and women's clinics, and also possibly a universal insurance plan in low-income counties. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Chloe. And so if there is a question from the California State Governor Gavin Newsom's office, you can go ahead and raise your hand. I can go ahead and mute you on our end. All right, and if not, then a question from our academic team. All right, Professor Waite.
Hi, thanks, Chloe, for your presentation. This is super interesting. My question might be slightly outside of the realm of your specific study, but I'm just wondering in terms of like other factors that could be playing a role here. Have you thought about sort of health education in schools and STIs? And yeah, what are your thoughts there?
So funny that you mentioned that, because my initial project was actually about the California Healthy Youth Act, which is a mandated public education for STIs in schools. I just couldn't do it in the scope of this project, but I did do a lot of research on it, and it is proven that the more that students learn in the classroom about STI rates, the lower the STI rates are. So that is a huge factor as well. The reason that I pursued healthcare accessibility instead is because those educational moments can also take place outside of the classroom too. And I was actually talking to Professor Quila about this, but part of the reason why more healthcare facilities could be associated with a decrease in STIs is because also informal education can take place with more healthcare facilities as well. That's a possibility too. But education is a huge, huge factor in decreasing STI rates, especially among teens and adolescents who actually have the highest rates of STIs in every single state, including California.
Awesome, thank you, great answer.
Great, thank you so much, Professor Waite, for that question. And thank you so much, Chloe, for a great presentation today.
Thanks.
And so our next student presenter is Nakisha Shoji, and she interned with Global Solutions.
Hi, can you all see my screen all right?
Yeah, looks great, thank you.
Great. So my name is Nakisha, and today I'll be presenting my research on the question, does racial background affect whether students seek mental health resources at UC schools? And so I think this is an important question to research because the majority of students who attempt or commit suicide do not use any of the services available from their university. So I think assessing which groups may be using these resources less will be important so we can tailor these services to students better. So my hypothesis going into this project was that students coming from marginalized communities of color would be less willing to seek out mental health resources compared to their white American peers. And so the way that I delved into this research was I conducted an online survey directed to California California adults, which asked their racial background and measured their willingness to use mental health resources. And I also compiled data from 2 UC schools, UCSB and UCLA, on the racial demographics of which students were utilizing their resources at counseling and psychological services or at CAPS. And so in regards to my survey findings, we did find that most California adults think that there is a moderate stigma attached to seeking mental health resources, with Latinx respondents reporting the highest levels of this perceived stigma. And so in regards to the analysis of the UCSB and UCLA campuses, the data between the 2 schools is very similar, and the overall percentages of students who utilized CAPS actually aligned pretty closely to the racial demographics at the school already. So there wasn't a major gap, except for the Latinx student population, which had a considerable gap with how many students were enrolled who are Latinx and how many are actually using the resources. There's a considerable drop. So in conclusion, there is a considerable social stigma surrounding seeking out mental health resources in California. And although for most racial groups, there wasn't too much of a gap at UCLA and UCSB, Latinx students did utilize CAPS the least compared to their peers across the racial demographics. And so for looking to the future with policy suggestions, one way that we can kind of close this gap is to hire more therapists and psychologists of color to make students feel more represented from these, from their own communities to the Latinx community. And thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Nakisha. And so if there is a question from Political Solutions, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, I can unmute you on our end. All right, and then if not, a question from our academic team. Oh, actually, so Sharif Amlani.
Hi, Sharif, TAGSR here at UCCS. Great presentation. I love your figure 2 in that it shows the distribution of stigmas across each racial group. I was just wondering, what do you think accounts for such? Why are some racial groups more likely to feel stigma relative to other racial groups?
That's a really interesting question. And I definitely had that myself while assessing the data. And I think it might come from cultural concepts regarding mental health from each individual culture and ethnic background. And so seeing, for example, like American Indian and Alaskan Natives are experiencing more minor stigma in regards to their conception of mental health compared to some other backgrounds, such as like African Americans who perceive like more moderate and serious stigma. And I think that just has to do with cultural backgrounds. Like if you're coming from a more collectivist community, for example, where there's less of like an individual idea on like mental health and seeking your own resources, there may be the sense that you're focused more on the collective and your family versus your own needs and resources. That's something that I did a little bit of research on. So I think that might kind of point to why certain groups might find there to be more stigma and why some groups might find there to be less stigma regarding mental health coming from different cultural backgrounds and different values.
Excellent, great work.
Great, thank you so much, Sharif, for that question. And Nakisha, thank you so much for a fantastic presentation today. And so our next student presenter is Celine Choi, and she interned this term with the Office of Sacramento City Council member Rick Jennings' office.
Is this okay?
Yeah, that looks great, Celine. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Celine, and this is my project on homelessness and substance abuse. So we all know that substance abuse is one of the main causes for homelessness in the United States, but I think it has been sidelined in homelessness policies. For example, there's no mention of it in the annual homeless assessment report to Congress from the 2010s onwards. Therefore, I'm wondering how connected is substance abuse with homelessness and how different cities with big homeless populations incorporate substance abuse into their policies. So when getting into the history of substance abuse and homelessness, one can't ignore deinstitutionalization. So some people blame homelessness on deinstitutionalization, but others say that it's actually a scapegoat for substance abuse. My hypothesis is as follows. Substance abuse is highly correlated with homelessness, which implies that the second argument holds more water. I approached the study in two different ways. First, by examining the correlation between substance abuse and homelessness and studying the policies in this area. The results show that there is a strong positive correlation between total homelessness population and the percentage with substance abuse. Moreover, substance abuse is kind of left out of some policies of homelessness, For example, the Los Angeles Shelter Program only considers it as a comorbid disorder in its eligibility criteria. Though my methods touch on both pure statistical data and policy, I have to acknowledge that I only have data for the correlation from 2015 onwards, and as different studies estimate different percentages, I've only used one source that has the most comprehensive data for my correlation. Given the importance of substance abuse and homelessness, this implies that we should focus more attention on substance abuse. It is also important to prevent the stigmatization of substance abuse by focusing less on deinstitutionalization and include substance abuse as its own disorder and not as a comorbid criteria. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Celine. And so if there is a question from our internship host site office, the Sacramento City Council member Rick Jennings' office, if you can just go ahead and raise your hand, I can unmute you on my end. All right, and if not, we'll go ahead and take a question from our academic team. All right, Professor Butters.
Nice job, Celine. Thank you for this presentation. I think about this a lot, and we've had a couple presentations on it today, and how there's a relationship between homelessness and substance abuse, right? You mentioned one of your policy suggestions, or one of your implications, I guess, is that we should be paying more attention to substance abuse as part of the homelessness story. And one of the things we should be doing is to prevent stigmatization of substance abuse. But what can we do as a society or as California policy professionals to encourage the rest of society to maybe have less stigmatization of substance abuse, especially among the homeless population? What would you suggest we do?
Okay, I'm muted. Great. I think that also ties into the previous presentation about, mental facility uses. So definitely a lot of education, first of all. And also, it's also part of our day-to-day language. So when we go out and we see homeless people, like some are less mentally stable than others. And sometimes we make the generalization, oh my God, there are like a lot of crazy people on the street. There are crazy homeless people on the street. And that, I think, is feeding into the stigmatization of, mental illness and substance abuse in our daily lives as well. So in addition to formal education on this area, and also in higher education and stuff, there's also the carefully choosing our words in our daily conversations as well.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you, Professor Butters, for that question. And thank you, Celine, for a great presentation today. And so our next student presenter is Val Vane, and she interned this term at the District Office of California State Assembly Member Phil Teen.
Hello, let me just share my screen. Okay, how does this look?
Oh, that looks great. Thank you, Val.
Okay, so hello everyone, my name is Val and I will be presenting on access to mental health resources for high school students. Within the last decade, there has been an increase in youth being diagnosed with depression and anxiety. In fact, there is a higher percentage of youth between the ages of 12 and 17 suffering from depression and anxiety, seen in Figure 1. Despite their mental health challenges, youth are still expected to perform well academically. However, this is not the case for many high school students who need the extra support from their schools. This is why I raised the question, how does access to mental health resources relate to a high school student's academic performance? My hypothesis is that the more mental health resources a student has access to, the better their academic performance will be. My main objective of this research is to evaluate the relationship between academic performance and mental health resources. And I attempted to do so by comparing student enrollment in advanced placement classes and student to counselor ratio within 4 public high schools in Sacramento. This is shown in Figure 2, along with a demographic of students taking at least one AP class in each school. With this graph, I was able to derive a line graph that directly showed the positive correlation between student enrollment in AP classes and student to counselor ratio seen in Figure 3. This means that within high schools I examined, which had fewer students assigned to one counselor, the more students there were that were enrolled in AP classes. Although I was able to find this positive correlation, the overall relationship between academic performance and mental health resources was inconclusive. This is due to the lack of data available and the lack of policies surrounding mental health resources. Thus, I suggest that the Department of Education require mental health resources as part of the public school's yearly report in order to effectively assess student resources and performances. In addition to this, I also suggest that the yearly California budget allocates state funds for public schools to employ an additional school psychologist for all students. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you so much, Val. And if there is someone from the District Office of California State Assembly Member Phil Ting, okay, so Alex Walker.
Great, thank you so much. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank Val for all of her work over this internship. We really appreciated it. And while you're also doing the research and doing the study. My question is, did you see, I don't know if you were able to access this data, but did you see any data for correlation when it came to test scores or grade point averages? Also, when it comes to access for mental health support, because I do understand the comparison to the AP class enrollment, but I'm curious if there's any, if you found any correlation with student performance in those courses. Thanks.
Right, yeah. Thank you for your question, but I specifically did not want to use test scores as one of the ways to test academic success and performance, just because I feel that test scores don't accurately represent a student's academic success, and it's not a holistic view of their academic experience. With that said, I did not find that much data other than the ones that are already reported and the ones that I saw here, and that's why I do recommend that the Department of Education make this mental health resources part of the yearly report that they have to do.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you, Alex, for that question. And thank you so much, Val, for a fantastic presentation today. And so our next student presenter is Catalina Velasco, and she interned this term with the Office of California State Governor Gavin Newsom's office.
I'm just going to share my screen and it's being blocked, so that's not great.
We could see part of it, which is that it shows that left-hand bar.
Is everything better now?
Yes, it looks great, Catalina. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that delay. My name is Catalina Velasco, and my research question focuses on what effect do mental health resources have on UC undergraduate graduation rates. A study showed that nearly 20% of individuals aged 18 to 25 were affected by mental illness. 64% of respondents further said they no longer attend college because of a mental health related reason. In 2006, the UC Student Mental Health Committee presented their findings and outlined a 3-tier model. My hypothesis is that better mental health resources will lead to better graduation outcomes. I examined 9 UC undergraduate campuses, evaluating their mental health resources through campus webpage searches and Google searches. I then compared graduation rates from 8 UCs before and after 2006, which is when the UCs began taking on a more active role in addressing mental health concerns. Figure 2 expands on the evaluation criteria from Figure 1 and scores each UC from a scale of 1 to 6. The highest scoring UCs are UC Berkeley, UCLA, and UC San Diego. The lowest scoring UCs are UC Merced, UC Santa Cruz, and UC Irvine. Figure 3 showcases the UC graduation outcomes, and Figure 4 shows the relationships between evaluation scores and graduation outcomes. As you can see, every UC saw an increase in graduation rates after 2006. UCLA and UC Berkeley have the highest graduation rates, while UC Riverside and UC Santa Cruz have the lowest. The UCLA, UC Berkeley, and UC Santa Cruz findings align with my hypothesis, but UC Riverside, with a score of 5 out of 6 and the lowest graduation rate, does not. It is important to note that other confounding variables, such as economic factors, may have come into play here. In terms of policy suggestions, more diverse resources, resource accessibility, and more funding would help to make more robust mental health services and help the UCs move towards actualizing their 3-tier model. Feedback from students should also be more readily available to the public, allowing for more transparency and accountability. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Catalina. And so going over to questions, if there is a question from Office of the California State Governor Gavin Newsom's office, just raise your hand and I can go ahead and unmute you on our end. All right, and if not, a question from our academic team. All right, Professor Quila.
Hi, Catalina. I just had a question. Obviously, this is a big issue now of, given COVID now. I was just wondering if you think there, what impact COVID might have on some of these issues, and if you think there's anything that schools can do in terms of mental health resources to help kind of alleviate maybe some of that, more, specifically dealing with COVID.
I think COVID has had like a giant impact just because students haven't been able to like socialize or see their friends, not to mention there's various economic burdens. If your parents are like essential workers, you're worried about their health. And if your parents can't even go to work, that's extremely stressful for the whole family as well. So I think schools should be more open to talking about like mental health, like within like the scope of a family, because if you're in an environment that is stressful and there's anxiety from like multiple different sources, it's very difficult to just focus on your own schoolwork and just to live life as normally as you can. So I think we should focus on mental health just more in generally, and like and just think about it that like life is full of surprises. No one expected COVID, but we need to prioritize this. And also we have everything with like the rise in Asian hate crimes and what happened with George Floyd. There's a lot that's been going on recently, so we need to be putting ourselves first mentally. So thank you for the question.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you, Professor Kayla, for that question, and thank you, Catalina, for a great presentation today. And so our next student is Jihad El Hanafi, and she interned this term with Office of Assembly Member Kevin Kiley.
Hi, everyone. So today I'll be talking about the price of innovation. How do regulations attract venture capital investments to the biotech industry? So the California biotech industry generates 53% of the nation's biotech revenues, which is $346 billion annually, and it provides 1.3 million jobs to Californians. It relies on venture capital investments as its main source of funding. Therefore, I wanted to look at how the government is regulating early stage to advance biotech companies. And the question is, how are regulations incentivizing or discouraging venture capital firms from investing into the biotech industry? I hypothesize that the more regulations are in place, the less incentive there is for venture capitalists to invest, and therefore the lower number and value of investment deals. To explore the hypothesis, I evaluated companies as venture capital firms would. I focused on their track record, specifically the number of patents generated by the California biotech industry. Patents, a form of regulation, can be used as key performance indicators for a company. I then collected data on the number and value of venture capital deals made within the biotech industry in the years 2006 to 2019. We looked at the funds per round, the first being the angel seed, then Series A, B, and C, and the funds are made in that order. I found that there was a large increase of funding for the industry that is consistent with the number of patents issued. The more patents, the more funding is given. I can also see that the early involvement of venture capital firms in the biotech industry can result in the creation of companies within the industry that produce marketable therapies that have a real impact on the quality of life. Therefore, it is important that the government involves venture capital firms, scientists, and entrepreneurs in the regulatory process to ensure the bridging of the gap between technology, economics, and regulation. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Jihad. And so if there's a question from the Office of Assembly Member Kevin Kiley. All right, then if not, over to our academic team. All right, Professor Butters.
Yeah, nice job here. I have a couple of questions, but I'm just going to ask the one here. On figure 4, I think here, you say that there's an overall increase in the number of patents issued in California by 17.3%. And that's over the whole time period, right? So I was just interested in, one of the dips is pretty obvious. It's the Great Recession, right? But I was just kind of interested if there were any like specific events that maybe caused an increase or a decrease in these types of patents going on throughout your time series.
Yeah, thank you. So the dip did happen after the recession, and that caused a lot of venture capital firms not to put in investments into biotech. I mean, their mentality is high risk. The higher the reward would be, but for that specific case, they didn't do that. For certain increases, there's an example on here specifically, but an example that recently happened was the FDA had approved an Alzheimer's drug, and the company that made that drug, Biogen, said that it's $100 billion industry, and funds started pouring in, especially venture capitalist funds. So for further research, and if I did have more time, I would have done a case study on the specific language or certain approvals of the FDA that would allow more venture capitalists or incentivize more venture capitalist firms to invest more in the biotech industry.
Fantastic, thank you.
Great, thank you, Professor Butters, for that question. And thank you, Jihad, for a great presentation today. And so I'm going to go ahead and give Brooke a chance here to go ahead and stop the recording.